Hello, it's Rebecca with Okoboji Tourism, and today we're going on a little adventure. Just a little while back, I was at the Dickinson County Museum in Spirit Lake, and on the counter I saw something that seemed pretty cool. It was this little flyer, and it is the West Lake Okoboji scenic tour narration of the SS Empress, which was a guided boat that took people on a great tour around West Lake Okoboji. And this was from many, many years ago, but I thought it'd be really fun if we could take that tour today and we could see maybe how things have changed from when the narration happened to today. I'd also like to give a shout out to Diane Hannigan with Pix Resort. She is helping us today by driving the boat. So have a little bit of patience with us because I'm not exactly sure the speed of the SS Empress. So we may have to adjust as we go, but I think we're going to have a really great day, and I hope you enjoy this tour. Scenic tour on the SS Empress, Port, Arnold's Park Amusement Park, West Lake Okoboji, Iowa. Summer scheduled 2, 4, 7:30, and 9. Schedule subject to change, call the office. Narration on present and shoreline history. Welcome aboard the SS Empress. We want you to sit back and enjoy your cruise around beautiful Lake West Okoboji. We would like to tell you what you are seeing as we go around, but first of all, we would like to remind you of the facilities we have on board. On the lower deck to the rear of the boat, you will find our heads. Also on the lower deck, you will find our galley, where they are serving hamburgers, cheeseburgers, popcorn, cold drinks of all kinds, coffee, hot chocolate, and, if you are over 19, cocktails and beer. This bay we are now in is known as Cass Bay. It is a rather shallow bay, running about 20 feet in depth. As we go out towards the main part of our lake, I would like to have you direct your attention to your left. There, you will see the point extending out into the water. This is Pillsbury Point, getting its name from the first minister in the lakes area, the Reverend Samuel Pillsbury. Located on this point is the famous Gardner Cabin. It was in 1856 when our first settlers moved into the lakes area. The following spring, in March of 1857, a tribe of renegade Sioux Indians moved into the area and massacred 5 of the 6 families. The 6th family was gone at the time. This band of Indians were renegades from the Sioux tribe. Ink Peduto was the name of the chief Indian, who was also an outcast of his own tribe. He was also known as Scarlet Point because he had red hair and was very poke-faced. He and his band proceeded from cottage to cottage, massacring 34 men, women, and children. There were 4 women captives taken, 2 survived and later were released. One of the survivors, Abigail Gardner, returned and lived in the cottage there on that point, and later opened the cottage as a museum. Now, the State Historical Society has restored it to its way it was appeared at the time of the massacre. The cabin is open for your viewing pleasure, and it is about a block and a half southwest of the roller coaster. We are now cruising out into the main portion of our lake. Off to the left, the area that you see is Sunset Beach, getting its name because it faces a sunset each evening. The first building that you see, the concrete block building just around the point, is Arnold's Park Pump House. This is where they receive their water. The name Okoboji has many interesting theories behind it. All agree that it is an Indian name. Some say that it means place of peace, and some say that it means beautiful waters. We are inclined to believe that it means beautiful waters. The first settlers coming to the lake were on a permanent basis there were those settlers in 1856. However, the men of Lewis and Clark expedition are the first credited with visiting the lakes area. The first maps made of this area date back to 1720. This lake is 7 miles long and 3.5 miles wide. It has 45 miles of shoreline and covers roughly 4,000 acres. It is 134 feet in depth at its deepest point. It is considered by National Geographic magazine to be one of 3 natural blue water lakes in the world, compared to Lake Louise in Canada and Lake Geneva in Switzerland. Many people ask what makes this lake blue. Others say, it certainly doesn't look blue to me, and of course, they are both correct, because on some days, the lake does not have a real raw blue appearance. The coloring comes from the sky. Our waters are so very pure and so very deep that they pick up the true coloring from the sky. When the lake is blue, you will find the sky is very clear and blue. When the sky is overcast, as it is on some days, you will see that the lake picks up that same appearance. Our lake is very pure because it is entirely spring-fed. We have no contributory waters whatsoever. We are on the crest of the divide between the Missouri and Mississippi rivers. Therefore, our waters flow either to the east or the west. We have a very limited watershed area, confined mostly to just the shoreline and a few of the city streets. Very little agricultural runoff comes from the shoreline into the lake. The state saw fit a few years ago to put in a sewer system completely around our lake, and this helps maintain the purity of our waters. It is rather interesting to note that a year or two ago, a survey was made by our state lakeside laboratory, and at this time they stated that the lake was approximately the same degree of purity as it was in 1917. There aren't too many lakes today that can boast a record of this type. As we are now cruising down pretty well towards the south end of our lake, as you look ahead and to your left, you will see the very south end known as Browns Bay. The sandy beach on the right is known as Terrace Park. The cluster of buildings that you see at the base of the bay is Boys Town near Omaha, Nebraska. Terrace Park has a very interesting background. A Dr. Green bought 160 acres there for $9,000. He planted over 600 trees and set out hundreds of lilacs. This is the reason for the naming of Lilac Hill behind Terrace Park. It first opened in 1915. In 1923, a beautiful ballroom and casino were built where Boys Town is located. It was said to be the finest ballroom between Chicago and the West Coast, and for many years, it was the most popular ballroom in the lakes area. Tragically, a tornado went through this area in 1936 and destroyed part of this area. In 1938, 27 acres of choice land was deeded to the missionaries of Our Lady of La Salette, and a missionary school for priests was opened and operated for several years. They found the cost of the operation to be excessive and deeded their equity to Boys Town, who tore it down. The ballroom and built buildings that you now see. They tore down the ballroom and built the buildings that you now see. Now, to our front and to our left, you will see another bay. This is Emerson Bay. And we're not quite there, so hold on just a touch. And I don't know how far into the bay you have to go.
Oh, maybe not that far. Okay.
We'll start that paragraph again. Now, to our front and left, you will see another bay. This is Emerson Bay. Notice the open area where there are no buildings to our left. This is the farm that the state of Iowa bought a few years ago and made into a public camping area. We'll get right down there in just a touch. Man, I don't know what speed the SS Empress cruised, but holy cow, they were going fast around the lake. We are now in Emerson Bay. we are coming up to the Jones Beach area and then to the Emerson Bay State Recreation area. All right, we'll start again. Now, to our front and to our left, you will see another bay. This is Emerson Bay. Notice the open area to which there are no buildings to our left. This is a farm the state of Iowa bought just a few years ago and made into a public camping area. To the right of it, you will see some dark buildings with a lighthouse in front. This is one of our new condominium units called Lighthouse Point. Further to the right, you will notice a rather large, low building. Well, we're not quite to that large, low building yet. Hold on. So I believe what we can see right now is Emerson Bay State Park. And then you'll see some brown condos in the back. That is Lighthouse Point. Once we get past Lighthouse Point, we will be that's Lighthouse Point right there. All right, and here we go. Further to the right, you will notice a rather large, low building. This is Heather Ridge Condominium. Please note the water tower. This is Camp Okoboji, originally known as the Walter League Camp, and on the side of it is Crescent Beach Resort. So you can see those long, low buildings right by the dam bomb crane there. That is Heather Ridge. And then coming up just to our right is Crescent Beach. It's fun how there's been a lot added since the 1970s, but also a lot still remains the same. And here we are. And on this side of it is Crescent Beach Resort. Much of this side of the lake was developed by Mr. Beck, and we will tell you more about him in a few moments. The point you see off to our left is called Eagle Point. Many years ago, there was a very large oak tree, some 4 stories high, close to the point. Every year, a bald eagle would come and build its nest on top of that very large oak tree. Hundreds of tourists would come to the lake area just to go over to Eagle Point and see the old bald eagle on its nest in that very stately tree. As a result, to this day, it is still called Eagle Point. And to the right of Eagle Point, we go into an area of Spencer Beach. This area between 2 points, Eagle Point and Gull Point, which you see to our left front, about in the middle between these 2 points, you can, if you look closely, see an opening in the trees. In that opening is a bridge that goes across a little canal. It is a very interesting little development called Lakewood Park. And you'll see the bridge right there. This is perhaps one of man's most elaborate dreams in the lake area. It was started back in 1911 when the same Mr. Beck, mentioned earlier, brought in a dredge line and dredged openings in Emerson Bay and one in Miller's Bay. Mr. Beck was going to make this area the Venice of America. There were to be lagoons, islands, walkways, rustic bridges, driveways, moonlit cruises on gondolas, and even a Dutch windmill with a reading room on top. However, the Depression years caught up with Mr. Beck prior to the completion of his dream, and the canals today remain simply a token of his dream that did not come true. I might say that perhaps the dream is closer to completion today than many people realize. We do have very many homes that are built many of them year-round homes on that canal. There are speedboats going through and lots of storage areas where people maintain their boats. Perhaps his dream isn't far from being a reality after all. Now you can see a good view of Gull Point to our left. This point gets its name from the fact that it is a very favorite roosting place for gulls in the spring and the fall of the year when they are on their migratory flights. We also have a large flock of white pelicans fly into our lake each year. The two cottages on the point belong to the estates of W.H. Sammons and Warren Dickinson. The Sammons family owned the Sioux City Journal, and Warren Dickinson is one of our noted sports heroes who was elected to the Iowa Sports Hall of Fame for being an engineer of a very fine golf courses. His daughter, Doris, has lived there in the cottage for many, many years. Gull Point State Park starts just behind that point. As we cruise by Gull Point, direct your attention just to the south and the right of it. You will see a very large, dark building in the trees. This is the shelter house for Gull Point State Park. This state park comprises of roughly 80 acres. The Conservation Commission tells us one of the most completely equipped state parks in the state of Iowa, and is Iowa's most used state park by overnight campers. The little hexagon-shaped building that you see just to the right of it is the Lake Patrol headquarters. We have a very active and very fine lake patrol on our lake, which is staffed 24 hours a day. Behind Gull Point State Park is the site of an old West Okoboji golf course and country club. It was closed in the 1940s and sold to the Boy Scouts for a camp. It was originally bought for a few $1,000s. The state recently purchased the camp from the Scouts for somewhere between $300,000 and $400,000. You can see how lakeshore property has increased in value. You may wonder why we are staying out where we are, rather than getting closer to the shore. We are running parallel to a very dangerous rock reef. It runs both north and south from Gull Point, so we have to stay on the outside of this rock reef in order to pass through. After we get by the rock reef, of course, we will take a little dip into Miller's Bay, the bay that you can see to our left and front. The sandy beach that you can see to our left is known as the Cove, and the area behind it is known as Lutheran Lakeside or Lutheran Bible Camp. We do have some very fine camps in our lake for boys and girls. We will point them out to you as we pass. Miller's Bay, the bay that we are approaching on our left, is one of our better fishing bays. The largest fish ever taken from our lakes was a paddlefish, weighing about 145 pounds. They are vegetarians and are now extinct in this lake, but they are still very prevalent in the Missouri and Mississippi rivers. The largest fish taken in recent years was a catfish weighing 54 pounds, and it was taken from Miller's Bay. The most popular fishing are for walleye and perch. The ice fishing in the winter is most popular, primarily fishing for perch, although lots of fish for walleyes, and they really catch some lunkers, weighing up to 15 pounds, which is a very large walleye. Our lake does freeze over in the wintertime. We normally have from 2 to 4 feet of ice, depending upon the severity of the winter and the amount of snowfall. Ice fishing, ice boating, skating, and a new dimension, snowmobiling, are all enjoyed on our lakes. A resident of Milford recently stated that he thought that there were more automobiles pulling snowmobiles through Milford in the winter than there are pulling boats in the summer. We are now in a pretty good position to see Miller's Bay. Please notice the open lawn area on the right side of the bay, on the base of the bay. This is the State Lakeside Laboratory, one of the leading biological research centers in the United States. It was started over 50 years ago by Dr. Shimmick of the University of Iowa. He was a leading biological research expert, and he selected this area as being the most ideal for biological research laboratory. It is operated today in conjunction with 3 state universities in Iowa, and they draw students from nearly every state in the Union, as well as many foreign countries. The large water tower that you see is the new water tower for the town of Wahpeton, which is this area on our left and on the west side of Okoboji. The building recently destroyed by a fire that you see just to the left of the water tower above the tree line is known as High Point. The High Point Hacienda was a very popular nightclub for many, many years. It is rather interesting to note that this was the original home of Mr. Beck, the man who developed much of this property on the west side of our lake. It is also interesting to note that many of the early settlers would not pay a premium and did not wish to live on the lakeshore, but built back where they had a fine view of the lake. As you can see from where the Beck home on High Point, this is called the High Point because it is one of the highest points of elevation in the state of Iowa, being almost 1,700 feet in elevation. Now, if you look to the left of the High Point, you will see another open lawn area. This is the present-day Presbyterian camp. It was originally the site of the beautiful Float Mansion, at one time said to be the birthplace of the Lakes area. This is the same home that was offered to President Coolidge for his summer White House in 1927. This beautiful mansion was built by the Float brothers in 1917. They lived in it for a few years, but it was closed for many, many years. In the late 1940s, a group of businessmen headed by Mr. Heinsheimer of Sioux Falls bought the old Float mansion and made it into a beautiful Okoboji club. Unfortunately, it caught fire and burned to the ground in the early 1950s. At this time, the Presbyterians bought and made it into the present-day Presbyterian camp. To our left and to the front, you will see a new building, a very modern-looking building. This is another condominium. This is a location of the old Babcock Resort. To give you an idea of cost, each of the 12 units sold for $54,000 and are now worth approximately $200,000. Condominium living is similar to apartment living, except that you receive a deed or title to your own individual apartment and may sell it without affecting the rest of the property. Many expenses are jointly shared, offering you a savings. We will be cruising along our shoreline now. This is a continuation of the west side of the lake. This is known as South Manhattan. You will notice that the trees on the south side of the lake are smaller than those on the east side of the lake. The reason for this is the many prairie fires that used to burn the west side of the lake. The prairies and the wind being primarily from the west and in the northwest, so many times the trees on this side of the lake have been burned away. You will also notice that there are hundreds of docks, boat hoists, and buoys around our lake. Each of these has to be taken out every fall and rebuilt or replaced in the spring. This is now a state law. The docks would be broken due to the movement of ice in the winter. Many people wonder about the valuation of the property around our lake. I guess it's not too wise to quote the actual value of property, but I think it's pretty safe in saying that it runs anywhere from $2,500 to $3,000 per foot of lake frontage. Also, as we go around, you will notice that the banks on the east and west shores of the lake are high, steep, and rocky, whereas on the north and south banks are rather low, flat, and sandy. This is due to the action of the glacier which made this lake. All of the Iowa Great Lakes are natural or Mother Nature-made lakes. The Wisconsin Glacier plowed out this lake bed when it was on its southward travels. Naturally, it pushed the soil to either side, leaving the east and west banks high, steep, and rocky, and leveling out those north and south banks, leaving them low, flat, and sandy. To our right, you will find one of the very finest natural sand beaches in the lake. This is Manhattan Beach. I'll pause for just a touch until we get to Manhattan Beach. To our right, in front, you will find one of the very finest natural sand beaches on the lake. This is Manhattan Beach. There was a very famous hotel built back in 1893, and every room faced the waterfront. In conjunction with the hotel was a very large ballroom built out over the point. At one time, they even had a bowling alley. It is rather interesting to note that one of our favorite old-time waltzes, the Missouri Waltz, was composed and first played in the ballroom located in one of the early hotels on Manhattan Point. To go back into the early history of the lake, the railroad started running tracks into the area in the 1870s. The first railroad passenger train came here on August 1st, 1882. At that time, the depot was located on the other side of the drawbridge in the town of Okoboji. It was just called Okoboji Lake's Depot. This later was phased out and moved to Arnold's Park. The Rock Island had a depot at the north end of our lake, and there was a severe competition between the railroad companies to get tourists from cities and bring them to our lakes area. The railroad built many of the hotels, such as the Orleans Hotel on Big Spirit, and this one to our left. They also built some of the first excursion boats that we had to carry people from the depot around to the various hotels and then pick them up at a later date and reverse the process. Many then were just excursion boats. These gracious old steamers provided not only transportation from the depot to the resorts. The first passenger boat on the lake was a sailboat, and this was in the early 1870s. The first steamboat was called the Favorite, and it was built on the Cedar River and ran there before coming to the lakes area. Shortly after, the Old Queen was built and brought to the lakes area in 1884. Just prior to the Queen, there was another very famous boat called the Lenox. This steamer was named after Ben Lenox, who was an official of the Chicago, Milwaukee, St. Paul Railroad. This was brought into the same year as the Queen. When we get to the other side of the lake, we will see the Okoboji Yacht Club headquarters, which is the headquarters of our racing fleet today. Note to everybody, we already passed the Okoboji Yacht Club because it moved from one side of the lake to the other. Back to the narration. While we are talking about our early boats and our early history, it is rather interesting to take note that the first sailboat race was held in the lakes area in 1867. There were 6 boats competing. The Okoboji Yacht Club was first formed in 1906 and was reorganized in 1933. The area we are going along now is known as South Manhattan. Ahead of us and to our left, you will notice Vacation Village, owned by Bob Ross and family. His father, Mr. Hobart Ross, originally owned Manhattan and then sold it and built Vacation Village, starting about 1945. It is a very fine convention center, a very nice family resort, and as you can see, has lots of playground room and playground equipment, fine swimming, and boating facilities. Now I would like to talk to you for a few minutes about the point and the section of land that you see in front of us. It is called Engelharv, named by the Badgerow family of Sioux City, who bought the property in 1891. And we're going to wait just a touch until we get a little bit further. And I may start over. It certainly looks a little different from when the SS Empress went by.
Yeah.
Just get around the point. Now I would like to talk to you for a few minutes about the point and the section of land that you see in front of us. It is called Engelhard Point, named by the Badrow family of Sioux City, who bought the property in 1891. They decided to name it after their sons, so they took the first syllable of each of their three sons' names and came up with the word Engelhard for Egbert, Ralph, and Harvey. The Indians had quite a different name for this. They called it Miniduka, sorry. They called it Miniduka, which means magic waters. They would come and camp in this area, letting their sick and weak drink from the mineral spring water, as they called it the magic waters, in belief that it would help them heal. As the white man moved into the area, they capitalized on the mineral water. They built a large bottling company in 1912 called the Okoboji Mineral Springs Bottling Company and bottled this same mineral water and shipped it all over the Midwest. It did not prove profitable and lasted only a few years. It is said that the water bubbles through the land here similar to the way it does in Carlsbad Caverns. Today, the springs are back about 100 yards from the shoreline. They are in the middle of a field and have a couple of planks over them. Most of them were filled in when they excavated the land that you see to the left. We have some very beautiful homes in the Engelhard Point, and to our left you will notice a very attractive A-frame. This is where the roof comes all the way to the ground. This type of structure is popular in the mountain regions through the world because the snow will not stay on the roof. Therefore, you do not have to build a building to carry a snow load as you might in the mountain regions. We will now point out a few homes as we go around. However, occupants change over the years. We now see two large brick homes. The first large brick home was owned by Mr. Lester Jungers, a real estate investor in Omaha, and now a permanent resident of the lake. Mr. Jungers invested in the motels and apartments in the Omaha area. The next brick home, just to the north of Jungers, is owned by Mr. Dan Osterman, a road contractor formerly of Ocheyedan, Iowa. He too makes this his permanent residence. As we go around the point, we are headed into a rather new development in the lakes area. This is the old Steenberg estate. The area was tied up in an estate for many years, but it has now been settled. They have built many beautiful homes, and many of them are occupied on the lake on a year-round basis. It is rather interesting to note that approximately 15% of the homes around the lake are lived in year-round, and 85% are lived in just during the 3 summer months. Directly in front of us is another condominium called Sandpiper Cove. Directly in front of us to our left, as you see, is an open area. This is called West Okoboji Harbor. As we cruise around, you will see that they have built a very fine canal and seawall to bring up the height of the property. They have built some very lovely homes and have some very fine lots for sale. This development is called the West Okoboji Harbors. Going down the shoreline is Girk's Resort, Blue Water Beach Resort, and on the very north end of the lake is Triboji Beach. This is a combination of the words Okoboji and Tribune. Triboji, as the Fort Dodge Tribune newspaper originally sold the lots. On the west side of the north end is another fine camp for boys and girls, the Methodist camp. There really isn't very much to tell you as we cut across our lake to Pikes Point. It might give you an opportunity to get up and stroll around as we go down on the lower deck and have a hamburger, a bag of popcorn, or something to drink. and we will be back with you in just a few moments. The point that you see to our left front is Pikes Point State Park. This was bought by the state of Iowa in 1932. They paid approximately $8,000 for 7 lakeside acres. It is, as you can see, a very beautiful swimming beach and one of the finest picnicking areas that we have in our lakes area. As a matter of fact, they even provide you with individual bathhouses. This is not an overnight or camping park. Next to the south of Pikes Point is a gray buildings that you can see are the first condominiums built in the lakes area, Bay Rim. The darker home, owned by Mr. Reimers, an insurance man from Spencer, quite a different home, was erected on that shore in 1892. A Mr. Patterson bought a building in the Chicago Exposition said to be a replica of the U.S. Treasury building. He bought the building to the lakes and erected it on the ridge that you see to the left. The house later became known as a haunted house on Lake Okoboji because it is said that one of their daughters threw herself off a cliff and was killed. The family left immediately, leaving the table set for dinner. It remained as such for many years, the haunted house of Okoboji. You may like to know a little about the craft upon which you are cruising. The SS Empress was built by the Dubuque Boat Company and Boiler Company out of Dubuque, Iowa, for Captain Bob Burha and family. The hull of the Empress was constructed at Dubuque and was loaded on flat cars and shipped by rail to the beach at Arnold's Park. Here, the Coast Guard certified welders welded the hull back together, added the superstructure, and it was launched in May of 1961. The Empress is 31 feet wide and 65 feet long. It weighs roughly 100 tons and is powered by 2 GMC diesels. It also has a 50 kilowatt light plant on board. Top cruising speed on the Empress is 15 miles per hour. We are now going approximately 13 miles per hour. The hull of the Empress goes down in the water approximately 2.5 feet. Props and rudder go down 3.5 feet, and when fully loaded, we need approximately 6.5 feet of water in which to operate. The Empress is inspected by the state of Iowa and is approved and licensed by the state of Iowa to carry 400 passengers. You are in good hands. The point that we are approaching to our left is known as Colcord's Point. It gets its name from the man who first settled on the point from Tulsa, Oklahoma. His wife was part Cherokee Indian and had inherited some oil wells. They came by horse and buggy to the lakes area in the summer and camped in a large tent on the point until they decided to build. You will notice a large 2-story white house with a round brick front porch. This is the first home they built. You also might notice the rust cottage where the boat can be driven in, like you would your car into a garage at your home. The living room connects to the boathouse for easy access. If you look down the shore a little ways, you will also see a large colonial-style home with brick facing on the east end. This is the home of Bob Foster, the retired vice president of Morale Meatpack. Notice the lovely landscaping of their backyard. The bay we are now crossing is known as Hayward's Bay. It was originally called Palmer's Bay, and the name was changed when it was bought and platted by Mr. Hayward from Spirit Lake. He and his two sons started a trading post here. And when the first census was taken at the lake, it was said that the bur oak trees in this region were so thick that the land was only accessible by water. Our lake does one thing that is very unusual. It is a very restless sleeper, and it turns over in its bed twice each year. The water on the bottom of the lake remains a constant 38 degrees in temperature year-round. The water on the top fluctuates with atmospheric temperature. There is a layer of water between two scientifically known thermoclimates, and the thermocline varies from several inches to several feet when the water on the top gets warmer. The thermocline thickens to protect the water on the bottom to keep it at its 38 degrees. This, when the water on the top gets near the 38 degree level, the thermocline gets smaller. Eventually, the waves roll and the wind blows the thermocline, breaks, and it is then that our water does a flip-flop, and the water on the top goes to the bottom and the water on the bottom comes to the top. Fortunately, the Empress always stays on top, so don't worry. The lake turning over completely aerates the water, helping to keep our lake very clean. Omaha Point. The point on our left is known as Omaha Point. You will notice there are no homes or cottages allowed on this point. This is because the residents jointly own the land and have agreed not to build, so everyone can use it as a game and party area. As we go around Omaha Point, we are going into an area known as Echo Bay. I am sure that you have wondered about the valuation of some of our homes. We do have homes in the lakes area that cost in excess of $300,000. This, of course, would include the price of the property. We do have a very interesting home coming into view in a few moments. It's called our steamship home. If you look at it carefully as we go broadside, you will see two smokestacks and the pilot house up top. It is coming into our view to our left now. That's the tall two-story white building with all the railings around the upper structure. If you look at it, you will see it does resemble an old steamship. It belonged to Mr. Clarence Landon, an insurance executive of Omaha. They once kept water on the roof to keep it cool. This was in the 1930s. The home, featuring green Spanish-style architecture, is that of Mr. Jensen, co-founder of the Golden Sun Feeds. The rust-colored home is owned by Mr. Bradley, a florist from Omaha. The lower unit houses his boats, recreational rooms, and guest rooms, on the second floor with a very lovely guest cottage in the background. The large white home is the Flanagan home. Their son Mike was one of our leading sailors for many years and is a member of the U.S. Olympic sailing team. Next door to the blue home is Mr. Dvorak, Dr. Dvorak. Dr. Dvorak lives here year-round. This is called the House of Angles because it does not have one 90-degree corner in the entire home. The aqua-colored home belongs to Mr. John Becker, a CPA from Omaha and president of the Omaha Zoo. Notice the patio in front of the blue-roofed home. You will see several patios such as this. The rip-wrapping in front of us was built in order to keep this bank from washing in. In 1968, we had a very severe storm and received 10 inches of rain in just a 24-hour period. The lake raised 18 inches overnight, and many of these banks washed away. This riprap is to prevent further erosion. This two-story white home behind the little beach house, white and blue, is the home of Mr. George Knack. Mr. Knack was an investment broker in Omaha, Nebraska, and now owns Lakes Skeglas. All along this very steep bank, you will notice several steps of steel tracks running up and down the bank. If you look very closely, you will see a cart that runs on those tracks. This is pulled by a cable, electrically operated, and carries people up and down the hill so they will not have to climb those many, many stairs. As I mentioned to you earlier, our lakes freeze over in the winter. You might be interested in noting that the average date that the lake freezes over is December 10th. The average date that the ice leaves in the spring is April 10th. This year, it was a few days early. Our first charter on the Empress was April 21st, which was our earliest season opening. Normally, in the spring, we start hosting high school proms. Colleges have their spring formals, some call them spring flings, etc., on the Empress. Thanks to the students, it is a good time to get the Empress out of her icy hibernation. The point on our left is known as Atwell's Point. Some people refer to it as Dixon's Point. The cottage on the point is owned by Mr. Wayne Eves, and it has been appropriately named our point of view. They certainly command a fine view of the lake. As we go around Dixon's or Atwell Point, we are going into an area known as Dixon Beach. This is probably one of the first settled areas on a permanent basis in the lakes area. The little cove that we are approaching was one of the better hunting areas back in the days prior to our cottages being built. Mr. Spear owns the stone home that you see on our left. Next door is a very lovely new home of Mr. Don Evans, co-owner of the new inn. Behind all that glass in front of the home on either side of the fireplace is their front room, featuring a 31-foot cathedral ceiling. The home has a lovely swimming pool in the front. The white building is our Okoboji Yacht Club headquarters, which we mentioned to you earlier. We do have a very active yacht club with over 250 members who race 3 days a week, Wednesdays, Saturdays, and Sundays. Our sailors are at the top of each list each year in the annual regattas. They have won Class C9. They have won the Class C 9 out of 11 years. Now, you see a very fine facilities of the new inn, called the New Inn because it is at the site of the famous original Inn Hotel, which started in 1897 with 12 rooms and grew into a very large showplace in the lakes area. The two-story white home with the aqua trim on the left side is that of Mr. Gus Glazer. Mr. Glazer owns a fine company making Gus Glazer cold cut meats. Living next door is Freddie Moore, who is a member of the State Commerce Commission. The Mackey cottage is next. The Stain cottage is Mr. Hubner's of Denison, Iowa. Mrs. Tangy lives in the Gray cottage next door. She formerly owned a hotel in Spencer. Then, if you skip 2 cottages, the next cottage with the colonial windows and the evergreens in the front is the Henry Metz cottage. Mr. Metz is the owner of the Metz Baking Company, makers of Old Home bread. Where you see the white banisters on the stairway going up is the old Fitch cottage of Fitch shampoo fame. Well, one thing's for sure, there aren't too many square feet available at this time to build around our lakes area. This is why our lakeshore property has increased in value. You might notice the stonework to the left with our flagstaff. This is the Boss property. Mr. Boss was the president of the Boss hotel chain. The gray cottage with the white picket fence around the beach house is the Jewett cottage. They are lumber dealers in Des Moines. Notice how close these docks are together and how many of them there are. And you know what a tremendous job it is each spring and each fall to take them out. The 2-story white cottage that you see coming up on our left with the large picture window On the first deck is the Al McIntosh cottage. Mr. McIntosh is a noted editor of the Laverne paper and was the author of the prize-winning editorial called Tired American. The editorial is said to be the most widely reprinted editorial in the history of American journalism. Mr. Joe Floyd owns the Sioux Falls and other TV stations in South Dakota. He leases the green cottage that you see to our left. Due to a small rock pile that extends from the point you see to our right, we are going to swing out into deeper water. A few years ago, a sailboat hit a rock pile out here. That's the first anyone knew that there were rocks in this area. To our left is Fort Dodge Point. There is a very extensive rock reef that extends from this point to the point that we first went around, which is Pillsbury Point. We're not quite to Fort Dodge Point yet, so we're quickening up the pace just a touch. So you'll see right here to our left is Fort Dodge Point. And there is a very extensive rock reef that extends from this point to the point that we very first went around at Pillsbury Point. We haven't talked to you too much about the Indians when they were first in the lakes area. It is rather interesting that no one has ever found out any relic of canoe or any form of water transportation. Many people say that the Indians were afraid of these waters. They believed they contained evil spirits and would not venture out into the deep waters of the lake because they did not wish to rile up those evil spirits. There are those who theorize that because of this, the Indians many times tried to dam up the fish in the shallow waters so it would make it easier for them to spear them. They further say that they might have built a portion of a reef that extends between these 2 points in order to confine the fish into a shallow bay to our left. You see, back in those days, the lake was much lower than it is now, 8 or 9 feet as a matter of fact, because we did not have to dam or to maintain the height of our waters. Therefore, much of this reef actually may have been exposed. Historians say that in the 1890s, cattle were driven between Eagle Point and Pocahontas Point, and they only had to swim at the very south end of that reef. In the early 1930s, the lake was very low in front of the amusement park, and there was 85 feet of sand beach, so you can now see how much larger the beach was than it is today. In the early 1930s, they did build a dam on the south end of the lake, which helps maintain the height of these waters, and of course, has held up a much higher than it was at the time. Our lakes, of course, are, as we told you earlier, entirely spring-fed, but this lake, Lake West Okoboji, is the main lake in the chain. It is the deepest lake, it is a feeder lake, and it is the lake that a survey was made on. I think it took 10 or 12 years for the U.S. government to make a survey, and they had picked out about 600 lakes in the world. They named this lake, West Okoboji, as one of the lakes that they felt was the finest quality and should at all times be maintained as it is today. The area off to our left is known as Des Moines Beach. Incidentally, at the lower end of Des Moines Beach is the Seamen's Chateau. And we'll get a little bit closer before I continue. At the Seamen's Chateau is the first permanent cottage that was built on this lake and is now part of the original Seamen's Chateau. Then, if you look at the very end of Des Moines Beach, you will see the causeway there with cars going across. This naturally divides West Lake Okoboji from the lake on the other side of the causeway, East Okoboji. It is a river-like lake and winds north and passes through the town of Spirit Lake and joins Iowa's largest natural lake, Spirit Lake. Then To the south, it forms three other smaller lakes, Upper Gar, Minawashta, and Lower Gar. At the lower end of Lower Gar, where the dam is located, the water eventually reaches the Little Sioux River. It's interesting that this cruise doesn't include Fillenworth Beach, which has been here well over 100 years. Definitely here when the Empress went around. But we'll wait just a touch and get ready to wrap up our tour. Arnold's Park in front of us was built back in the early 1920s. The park has gone through quite a remodeling program, and I am sure you will notice quite a change. Arnold's Park gets its name from the Arnold's family, who built the original home that became the Peacock Club. The Arnolds, who had two little girls, and one of them and a friend were out playing one afternoon and said, "Let's call it Arnold's Park." Her parents liked it, and it's been known as Arnold's Park ever since. Ladies and gentlemen, we are approaching our mooring position, and we certainly wish to take this opportunity to thank you for joining us. We do hope that you have enjoyed your cruise and that you have enjoyed your day. Drive very carefully going home, because we do want you to come back and see us again sometime real soon. Remember that we have a dinner dance cruise on Friday evenings. Get your reservations early. On Saturday night, we have regular dance cruise at 10 p.m. We also cater to charters for your convention, anniversary, prom, fraternity, spring fling, or class reunion. Just stop at the ticket office or call, and we will be happy to give you further information.